Light. The light of that murdered sun still burns me. I see it through my eyelids, blazing out of history from that bloody day, hinting at fires indescribable. It is like something holy, as if it were the light of God's own heaven that burned the world and billions of lives with it. I carry that light always, seared into the back of my mind. I make no excuses, no denials, no apologies for what I have done. I know what I am. Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio, Book 1 in the Sun Eater saga. This is the opening to one of my favorite series of all time, one of my favorite things that I have read, and I am here to just have a little short discussion about it and talk about some of the themes, some of the ideas, some of the structure behind this, some of the things that it's doing, and also a bit of a plot recap as we get closer and closer to Shadows Upon Time. And so, if you did not see the name of the video or the thumbnail and you somehow are still stumbled here and you have not read this book, be very cautious. I'm going to spoil all of this book. Okay? Some of the bigger picture stuff I talk about here in the beginning, probably not big spoilers, but especially once I get into the plot details and everything, obviously that's going to be taking away any of the surprise that you might get reading this for the first time. So please proceed with caution. Now, let's get in here and talk about this. What is Sun Eater? Well, from page number 1, we see this is a frame narrative. This is Hadrian telling us his story. We see him right off the bat telling us he ended this massive war between the humans and the Cielcen, these aliens. And he did this by destroying a sun and wiping out billions of people, of beings, right? He ended this thing in a way that ends it by dropping the hammer of all hammers, really. And we see this is a horrible thing that he has done. Why did he do this? How did this come to pass? Those are the questions that we are left with after Hadrian basically tells us not the complete ending of his story, but the ending of the war, at least, right? Because we know his story has proceeded past the end of that war, because this is him sitting there on the planet Colchis, and he is telling us the story. He's writing all of this down for us to read. And so that's what we're going to go through here, right? We're seeing this frame narrative. We see this first person recounting of all the details of not his entire life, but most of his life, these big events that have led up to the end of the Cielcen War. And so what does that accomplish? Well, in my opinion, we see it's really interesting what Ruocchio has done with this, right? Because we know that Hadrian is going to live at least up to the point where he tells us his story, right? We don't necessarily know what's happening after he tells us the story, but we know that he has lived at least to recount this to us. And so some might say, well, doesn't that remove all the stakes? How am I going to see him go through these battle scenes and how am I going to feel the tension? Oh, is he going to make it? Of course he's going to make it. He's telling us the story. So immediately the question is, how is Ruocchio going to maintain tension and high stakes through these books? And I'm not going to spoil anything in any of the future books. All I will say is he does. Okay? Suffice it to say for now, he does. But that's one of the major questions. And then, of course, the other secondary things are, we know we're building up to this point, but how do we get there? That's such a huge distance to travel from where we begin here on Delos. And so that's just having that mystery, having that air of deep melancholy that Hadrian has as he's telling us the story. It really gives you this vibe of this is not a good thing. This was a person who was forced to do a horrible thing, and why was he forced to do that? Why was that the only option left, or at least the best option? There's so many questions that get sort of baked into having this style of storytelling, and I think that that's really cool. It's certainly not the only story that's out there like that, but I do tend to find it quite interesting, as long as the author can still maintain tension as we go through. I think some of the themes that we then see also built on top of this, there's a lot about who Hadrian is as a person and how he's evolving, right? We see him early on as this sort of prideful prince, right? And he's going through his life and he feels sort of entitled to some things, and we see him very quickly humbled and him sort of learning hubris and the results of that pride that he had and why he needs to think about the world a little bit differently, or the universe a little bit differently, or himself a little bit differently. And he's sort of learning to be honest with himself. And I find that journey to be really interesting to kind of see as that plays out as we go through here. I think that we see a lot about, of course, as the story progresses, a lot about suffering and struggling and persevering through that, and sort of doing what you have to do to get through this really difficult situation that he finds himself in. And we see him striving to maintain his values and who he is as a person, at least the things that he views as being good aspects of himself. And he's trying to stick to those things and not let these circumstances tear all that down. And I really appreciate seeing that. I think that the other piece alongside that, though, as he learns more and more about what's going on and what's going on in the universe, in the galaxy, he starts to realize that he doesn't know quite as much as he thought he did. And so we see this really interesting exploration of like ignorance and maybe naivety and just wanting to do the right thing, but not realizing that maybe that thing, while it would be the best on paper, just isn't super realistic. And I think we all have had situations like that in our lives. And I find that really interesting to go through in a bigger, more exaggerated sense here in this sort of fantasy sci-fi blend type of story. The other thing that Rocchio does with all of these books, really, right, but it begins here, is he is making references to, paying homages to certain things that he's influenced by. He's sort of interacting with these other stories that exist, right? And everybody likes to throw out Dune and Book of the New Sun, Name of the Wind. I haven't read Name of the Wind, so I can't speak to that, right? I'm aware that it's a frame narrative, right? So maybe that's what they're talking about. I don't know. But, we see things that people say Dune, for example. And I think Rocchio is certainly not copying Dune. He's taking some things that Dune did and putting a spin on it in a way that he feels is more fitting to this story, or maybe more realistic in terms of what a far future could be. This is set, I think it's 20,000 years in our future or something like that, right? When humanity sort of expanded out and we've settled a good proportion of the galaxy. And, so we'll see things like the Scoliasts, which is sort of his version of a Mentat from Dune, right? In Dune, the Mentats are quite literally human computers. And what Rocchio does is he takes that and he's just like, man, I just don't know if that's really realistic. I just don't know that humans can actually do that. And so what if they are highly trained academics? They're very logical. They're very rational. They have a lot of rhetorical skills, but they're not perfect. They're not infallible, right? And I personally find that to be a lot more realistic of what something might do. You could think about in our present time, me making this video, our future, our potential future of the impacts of artificial intelligence and robotics and all this kind of stuff, right? What could potentially happen? In the Sun Eater story, that's the distant past. Just like in Dune, the distant past, the Butlerian Jihad, right? Things where we see these machines that have sort of risen up and taken over humanity, and like, now what are we going to do? So in Dune, we have outlawed all AI, all computers, all this kind of stuff. Is that realistic? Probably not. People are going to break the rules, right? People break the rules now. They're going to break the rules with something as powerful as that. And so in Sun Eater, we see people still use those things, but it is different, right? There are certain culturally accepted and unaccepted ways to do this. And the people who utilize machines and AI and those sorts of things in a way that goes outside of what general humanity has agreed upon is reasonable, they are very much looked down upon. They are ostracized. They are othered, right? Which I think, is that better or worse? I don't know, but it certainly feels a little bit more realistic to me. The other thing that we see is that Hadrian as a character will quote these like classic texts, right? He's a very educated person. And so we'll see him quote, Shakespeare, and we'll see him quote these old Greek tragedies. And he talks about the ship of Theseus a lot, and, things like that. And he'll also mention things that seemingly are pulled straight from the Book of the New Sun, which is very interesting. It's a huge influence on Rocchio as a writer. And so it's cool, as also a fan of Gene Wolfe, to see those things in here. But it's also one of those things that it fits within the diegesis of the world, right? Like Hadrian is quoting a classic text, something that was very influential, something that they learned a lot from. Book of the New Sun, right? It's cool. It just fits perfectly within this, that somebody 20,000 years in our future might look upon Gene Wolfe as being from a roughly similar time period as Homer or whatever, right? Like, it's just, all of it is so far distant that it kind of gets lumped together into those classics. So I just find that really cool, and that's something that Hadrian will do throughout the entire series, is reference all those older things. And he's again interacting with all these older stories from our world. He does this with things with Star Wars, things from Tolkien, right? There's a lot of stuff that Rocchio will do, but it's all in a way that fits really well within the story, within the world. It's never jarring. Okay, so let's get in here and talk about what actually happens in Empire of Silence. Well, we start off on Delos with Hadrian is there with his father, Lord Alistair, and his brother Crispin, and they're there sort of a lesser house, a lesser ruler on this planet. And we see that Hadrian is sort of we assume to be the heir of this ruling situation, right? And he's just sort of going about his life, and we start to see he doesn't particularly like his brother Crispin very much. Thinks he's sort of a show-off and is a little bit too focused on the Colosso, sort of like the gladiator fighting way that it happens on this world. And we see that Hadrian and Crispin both are trained in a variety of things, and in sword play, and Hadrian especially with academics, and he learns a lot from Tor Gibson, who is sort of his tutor, his mentor. He teaches him so much about philosophy and language. He knows all these different languages, including, importantly, the Cielcen language. He's one of very few people who can speak, at least to a pretty good degree, the Cielcen language. And we see him just learning all these things and building this really strong relationship with Tor Gibson, who in some ways is sort of more of a father to him than Lord Alistair is, in a lot of ways. And he's got this strong attachment to Tor Gibson. And the mother is not really in the immediate picture. She lives elsewhere, right? And we see them kind of going about their day-to-day life, and Lord Alistair needs to name an heir. And we see that Hadrian is sort of passed up by Crispin. His father chooses Crispin. He thinks he will be the better heir and the better ruler. And Hadrian is just horrified by this, just so angry. It's horrible. And, we see him angry about this. He's losing this thing that he assumed that he was going to have, that he felt entitled to. We see him get mugged out on the street, and all of his money is stolen, and just all this stuff, which is humiliating to Lord Alistair. And it's this just big political mess and social mess. And now he gets disowned, essentially, by his father, and he's going to get shipped out to join the Chantry, which is sort of like the big church situation, right? He's actually going to be an inquisitor, like a torturer for the Chantry, and he does not want to do this. He hates this idea, and he's like, there's no way that I'm going to let this happen. I'm going to escape. And so he enlists the help of Tor Gibson to try to get out of this situation, and Gibson, of course, loving Hadrian like a son, decides to help him, even though he knows that if they get caught, it's very, very bad. And as it happens in stories, they get caught, right? And we see that Gibson is captured and is sentenced to death. It goes through this, there's this execution. Gibson is killed. It's horrible for Hadrian. He hates seeing this, essentially his father figure, killed by his actual father, and it just, again, cements his hatred for this place and this situation. And he actually goes and enlists the help of his mother to escape, not before absolutely beating up Crispin to a pulp, which is pretty awful, but he just wants to get out of there no matter what, right? So he escapes, he gets out, he's on this ship, and on that ship, he is betrayed by this weird ragtag group of people, including a homunculus, who's like this sort of inhuman, genetically created thing. Right, which Hadrian himself sort of is, right? He is a genetically engineered, he's a Palatine, right? He's larger than most people, he's much more long-lived than normal humans would be, right? So he himself has, there's a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Hypocrisy, that's the word, wow. But he looks down on this thing, and he doesn't really put together, there's a seed of that within himself as well, but nonetheless, he's on this ship, and they're going to whatever place. Next thing he knows, he's waking up on this weird planet. This is not where he was supposed to be. And he was betrayed by the crew of that ship. he finds himself on this planet of Emesh, where he is just in a really, really bad situation. He finds himself just encountering poverty and disease and death, really for the first time in his life. Like, this is he's always lived very, very well with Lord Alistair on Delos, and it's this horrible situation that he finds himself in, and he's kind of stuck because he has money he can access, but he can't do it because it'll immediately alert his father to his location. He does not want to be found. He doesn't want to be shipped off to the Chantry. So he's trying to stay hidden. And so he's sort of stuck in this situation where he doesn't have any money. He has to like beg and steal for food. He meets this girl named Kat, and some people criticize this part of the story, and I understand, but eventually forms a relationship with her, and she dies, and he's telling her this story of Karn Sagara and this mythical hero, and it's a horrible experience for him, right? He sees somebody that he cares about that originally could not see himself coming to care about, but he does, and she passes, and it's so sad for him, and he's sort of lost and out of options, and he eventually goes and joins the Colosso, the very thing that he thought his brother was a dork for spending so much time doing. But he's like, all right, I guess I'm going to go do this. I got to make some money. I got to survive. And so he joins the Colosso, and he's there, and he's fighting, and he starts to make a name for himself because remember, he's trained as a swordsman, and he also is desperate to survive. And so we get a lot of interesting things with these gladiator battles, and he starts to meet some people and form these bonds through this shared suffering of this experience that they all have, and getting some notoriety. And he's noticed by the Count, is it Balian Mataro, who is like, hey, this guy's really good. What's going on? I want to know some more, right? So he's sort of picked out, and they talk more and more. He decides he wants Hadrian to not only to tutor his children, but he wants Hadrian to marry the daughter, because he wants to secure that bloodline. He finds out who Hadrian is. He wants to secure that bloodline and mingle it with his own in the Mataro bloodline. And so now we're in this situation where Hadrian has once more found himself locked into a situation that he does not like, that he doesn't want, and it is dangerous for him because at any moment Mataro can tell his father where he is, and he can come and get plucked out of Emesh and get sent over to the Chantry, right? So he has to cooperate even though he really does not want to. And also on Emesh, Hadrian meets Dr. Valka Ondera, who is there to investigate these ruins. She's trying to find evidence of this culture, race, something, right? This thing that's just very strange, very alien. They found these ruins that they think might have some sort of evidence about this thing. And so they're investigating this. Hadrian is finally allowed to go with them. And once there, Hadrian is in here. He's sort of looking around the ruins, and he finds himself in this weird, like, he's getting deeper and deeper into these ruins in an amount of space that doesn't seem to make sense. And we find out later that it seems like there's some kind of weird time-space thing that's happening, right? Because Valka was out there looking for him and couldn't find him. And the ruins are not this big, right? She should have been able to find him pretty easily, but somehow she couldn't. There was some sort of weird spatial thing that's happening. But when he's in this situation, Hadrian has this vision where he sees this huge army of Cielcen and the Cielcen ruler who were just destroying all these planets, laying waste to humankind, marching forward, and then he sees all of them themselves are wiped out in this huge flash of light. And he's horrified by this, right? He doesn't know what to make out of it. He's confused, but it's also just terrifying. You think about the sense of impending doom that you would have from seeing a vision like this in these ancient ruins. Like, that's a little weird. It's a little creepy. You know what I mean? And so he's just kind of all over the place about this, and they continue the investigations, and they finally reunite. Valka finally finds him, but she never gets to see this vision, right? They can't find that same thing twice. It's just this special experience that Hadrian himself had, and they don't know why. They continue through their investigation, and then all of a sudden, here comes this spaceship that's crash landing on the planet. We find out the Cielcen are attacking Emesh, and this spaceship has sort of fallen down, and they go and they imprison these Cielcen that they find on the ship. And the Imperial Lieutenant Basander Lin is there, and he is there. His job, what he wants to do, is get more information out of these Cielcen. We got to figure out what is going on. Why are they here? Where did they come from? What do they know about the war efforts? All this kind of stuff. And Hadrian really wants to help. He thinks, again, remember, he knows some of the language, and he thinks that he can help through negotiation and in a peaceful way to seek resolution through this war. And so he volunteers to be part of this, and he's sort of roped into this whole situation where they're going to torture the Cialcin leader, Uvenari. They're going to torture him for information, and they want Hadrian to be the translator. And he's sort of going behind their back a little bit, and he's speaking to the Cialcin in the Cialcin language that no one else can understand. And he's sort of having a private conversation with Uvenari, but also filling in the imperial army, Basander Lin and the torturer, with some information to sort of keep them at bay, but not telling them everything. He's trying to figure out what he can do in a peaceful way to kind of get into this situation and get through to somebody and help find some peace. And ultimately, it doesn't work. Shocking, right? Because we have 6 more books in the series. But it's not all for naught. There is something productive that comes out of this, something helpful for Hadrian. He finds out that the Cialcin are working with this planet Vorgossos, and he decides that he needs to figure out how to get there, right? So he's trying to get some more information, can't really get it out. It's this just horrible struggle that he is in with Uvenari. And what he's learning through this process is that Uvenari and the Cialcin at large do not want to be subjugated. And Uvenari eventually begs Hadrian to kill him because they cannot be slaves, they cannot be servants, and his spirit is just crushed by the situation that he has found, or it has found itself in, I should say. And so Hadrian has to do this, and finding himself enacting violence in a situation where he just wanted to peacefully help, and it's starting to kind of penetrate his brain a little bit now that, like, man, is my approach actually gonna work? Is this, you know what I mean? Like, is this, I don't know if this is actually feasible, but I'm still gonna try. I'm gonna keep trying. And they are able to get that last little bit of information of how to actually get there, at least an idea of how to get there. And so now where we end off is that Hadrian and Valka and Basander Lin and a handful of the gladiators that he fought with in the Colosso are going to go out and try to find Vorgossos and try to figure out what's going on there. Can we strike up a negotiation with the Cialcin over on that planet? Because that's really the only and best lead that we have. So now as we zoom back out and think about the beginning of this book, when Hadrian tells us that he is remembered as the man who ended the war, he's the man who was the half-mortal, he is the monster who destroyed billions of lives. And then we see what happened in this story of this just young prince who he felt really entitled to stuff and had to be humbled very quickly and went through this horrible experience on Emesh, and now he's sort of been thrust into this role with the empire that he wasn't counting on, but is sort of close to what he wanted, right? He wants this opportunity to seek peace through negotiation because he can speak the Cialcin language rather than just constant fighting that's not working. So many people are dying. He wants a chance to do this peacefully, and he is getting that chance now, even though it happened in a way that he was not expecting. And that's where we leave off in Empire of Silence. I love this book. I love how it sets up this universe and the story of Hadrian and everything about it. I love that he ends off with saying, borrowing again from Book of the New Sun, giving a nod there and basically saying, like, hey, reader, thank you for sticking with me. I know that this has not been super easy. I did some bad things. I'm going to do more bad things. If you need to stop, you can stop. I'll go on alone. Right? Which is just, there's so much great foreshadowing in here where Rocchio will kind of put in these lines of just saying, like, hey, it's going to get worse and worse, right? Which I just find really cool as a storytelling device. So that's Empire of Silence. Fantastic beginning to a fantastic series. This is my least favorite book of the series, and I love it to death, right? So it just goes to show how great the rest of the books are. So if you've watched this far in the video, I assume you have read this book. So talk to me in the comments. What did you like about it? What's your favorite part? Whatever, right? We can talk Empire of Silence, but please don't spoil any other books in the series, please. And just hang out with me down there. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up. If you like the channel, you want to see more of it, hit that subscribe button. We got memberships. We got Patreon book club. We got free Discord for everybody. There's so much stuff all in the description. Check that out. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.